Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by longtime horror fan, former DJ, entertainer now working in the technology field by day, and internet radio producer by night, Joel Michalec. Joel, how you doing today, man?
Great. Thank you. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much. We've been trying to get this going for a while, but due to my personal health issues with COVID, and you've had some family stuff, we've had to delay this episode a couple of times. But to finally have you here, man. Oh, no, man. I'm so excited to have you here. Michael Hanning, my booker, you and him got in touch with each other, and we were able to make this happen. So, Michael, thank you. Joel, thank you for reaching out to us, man. We are so excited. And because of that, I got to listen to your podcast as well. So, over time, though, you've produced 5 internet talk shows, hosting 3 of them. And right now, currently, you're the host of the Joel Michalec Show, featuring the lovely Sharon, who that is your wife, correct?
Yes.
Absolutely. That's so cool, man, because me and Ashley didn't see that coming through Sledgehammer Horror. So to be able to work so closely with someone that you love so much definitely makes it less of a hobby and more of just hanging out with the one that you love the most. So now
she's the star of the show.
Huh?
She's the star of the show. On our radio network, she had her own show with a girlfriend. And I had already been on the air for 8 years when their show came onto our network. And it was called Chick Chat, and they did nothing but just 2 chicks chatting. And she was beating me out in the ratings on my own network. So needless to say, I was very pleased that she decided to join my show because she's really the star of the show.
You're like, so I married her and I took her ratings.
That's right.
So on the Joel Michalec Show, you guys talk about a variety of topics from news to entertainment, elements of society, mixing the occasional guest. It becomes a well-seasoned hold on to your seat hour of talk radio. Obviously, just like right now, you don't have to wear pants. So for the people that haven't listened to it, I do have all the links to this podcast down here in the description, as well as social media links. So you guys make sure you're giving them a follow. Check out the podcast with him and the lovely Sharon. But just a little bit of a briefing. What do you guys do on the Joel Michalec Show that for the people that haven't heard you guys yet?
So as you said, it's news, it's some society, but it's not your traditional, we're not going to get on there and talk about this news story in the traditional news sense. The thing is the lovely Sharon and I, because I've tried it all before. In my previous incarnations, the Behind the Mic show, my longest running show, we did news, we did politics, and I left it. I killed the show because it was killing me. And so when I decided that you could no longer have a rational political discussion with people in this country, I moved on. And now we take elements of the news. Now we take elements of society and social media, and we bring fun or funny to it and try to, and if we do have a serious tone, it's like taking something stupid from that and saying, what's going on here? What has happened? So we try to keep everything as entertaining and light as we can. And we have a segment every week called the Wombat of the Week, which everyone can send links in. And it's usually we tell people, send us a link to stupid people doing stupid things, and it winds up in the news. And we celebrate that, So
it's your Florida hour.
It's our Florida hour. It can be. We've had some episodes where every story were Florida man stories, so that's what we do. So when we say when you say we take a little bit of news, a little bit of this, we take it, but we're usually stomping a mud hole in it one way or the other to try to bring a comedic value to it rather than what we see all the time on the news, So
you're right. It is upsetting that nowadays you can't talk about politics with somebody that you disagree with, because it's always going to turn into a sour, rotten conversation. And it's not the way it should be. We live in a country where we're each free to have our own opinions and to express the values that we see fit for ourselves. And it just gets it's so much of a bummer that becomes a fight now. I don't want to fight you. That's why I don't talk about it. I don't talk about that. I don't talk about my religious beliefs, because you're not going to change my mind. I'm not going to change your mind. We're both steadfast in what we believe in. So instead of having a fight, let's just ignore the whole damn thing.
I'll give you a quick story. We had a very popular band from the 80s booked on my previous show, Behind the Mic. New Shoes. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They were very dancey in the 80s. And then apparently they're doing jazz now. And when they got in touch with us, or we got in touch with them and we had them booked, I was beside myself. I'm a former disc jockey. These were people that were in the crate number 1. You know what I mean?
Right.
I could not wait to talk to them. We had them booked for a couple of weeks. And 2 days before the show, my producer called me. He said, I just heard from the people from New Shoes. and they don't want to have the interview with you anymore because they don't believe in your political opinions. And I'm like, wait a minute, like I don't really have any. I walk the center of the line. But so just real quickly, just so in and out of radio and in my personal life, I have lost friends for not taking a side, just saying, hey, look, let's look at this from the center. And then after you were done talking, you can go out all your left and right if you want. But let's look at it this way. People hate that.
See, I'm with you. I hate a three-party system. That's all I'm going to say about the situation is I hate a three-party system. I think that you should give me some options. I will pick the best option, not based on the party that they have, but on the beliefs that they have and the people that they are. And that's all I'm going to say. Like Forrest Gump, that's all I'm going to say about that.
And that's why we just make fun of it all now. The hell with it.
It's impossible not to. Like, there's no way you can take politics serious anymore. You just can't.
Yeah.
So Joel, the reason we're here today, my friend, we know what you got going on right now with the Joel Michalec Show, and you guys need to click the links on here in the description before we go any farther. Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. Make sure you're following on social media so you can go along on this journey with Joel and the lovely Sharon. But Joel, I want to take it back to the past, my friend. And I want to talk about the first horror movie you watched, the one that got you started in our world of horror. And your first horror movie was?
As I told you officially, it would be The Exorcist because I saw it at a young age. And we can dabble into a little bit of what I'm talking about there. But yes, the first official one that I've seen, scared the hell out of me. You're wearing the shirt.
Yes,
was
sir.
The Exorcist. And
one
not
of my
even
favorite
in the
posters in cinematic history, man. That scene itself is just so, the thematics of that scene is just so beautiful. And I got to tell the story real quick for previous listeners. I'm sorry you got to hear it again, but The Exorcist will always have a stigma to me because, like I said, I grew up in a video store and we watched horror movies a lot. And The Exorcist is the only movie my parents were very young when they had me. So they were more peers, even at a young age, than parents, not in a negative way. They were awesome and they were great. They were loving, but they knew discipline. And The Exorcist is the first movie that my mother ever shut off. She was like, you're not watching this. This is not going to happen. This is too much. And so ever since then, The Exorcist had that stigma to me and I still believe to this day, it's not the best movie ever made by a long stretch, but I still believe it's the scariest. So do you remember how old you were the first time you seen it, Joel?
6 or 7. It was on network television. So it was after it made its movie run and it was on ABC or CBS, whatever that Saturday night movie was. But, so just a little contrast. So I enjoyed it. I had nightmares. It scared the hell out of me, but it got me really into that genre. And so after that, at the age of 9, my mother just finished a book and she's like, here, you might as well read this. It was Stephen King's The Shining. So I thank my mother for instilling the macabre into me because she was really into it to a certain degree.
I have the keychain, the 217 right here all the time, man. Huge Shining 217.
Well, so. But the movie did scare the movie did scare me. I can watch it today, and there are parts that still scare me. And my wife and I were both movie theater managers at the time that the Redux came out, and they put the extra 11 minutes in it, I think, and including the famed spider walk, which I don't know if you're aware of this, but there were 2 spider walks filmed. Did you know that? Okay, they had 2. No. So they filmed the spider walk twice. First of all, it didn't even make the original cut, as you remember. It came out with the Redux. Right. One of them was her coming down the steps and spewing blood. That's the one we got to see in the Redux. And apparently, I just found out recently that they filmed another version where she came down the steps and she had like a snake-like tongue that was coming out of her mouth. So I guess they felt like vomiting blood was better for us on the Redux, but it scared me all over again. I mean, they put the 11 minutes they put back into that film just renewed the whole film in my eyes. It was like a whole new film again.
And I remember going to see the Redux when it came out, and I had to buy the extended cut when it came out on DVD as well, because this movie is, like I said, I am strongly in the field of this is the scariest movie of all time. Now, I have friends that I'm very close with that can't stand it. They think it's boring, and it's like, I can tell you're younger than me because if I grew up with, if I grew up with Saw and things like of that nature, and then you go back and watch The Exorcist, you're like, it's slow. It's, it's almost a snail's pace, but there's just something about it. And then now, like you said, you watch it later on in life as a little boy, it scared me. As the father of two little girls, it scares me even more. What would I be able to do to help my little girl in this situation? So that's
Right.
another joy about watching these movies at different points in our life, because they affect us in completely different ways. And that's leading me into my next question for you, Joel. This is a movie that is iconic to horror fans for having many different scenes. We just talked about the spider walk, which the first time you see that is terrifying. But which scene would you say from The Exorcist on first viewing affected you the most?
I thought about this, and there were a couple, and I said, from listening to your podcast, I knew this question was coming. But I would have to say that the one that freaked me out the most, I think, at that time, was when they went into the room at night when the housekeeper wanted to show Father Karras something and calls him up and has him come over. And so Reagan is inside this vessel, trapped in there, and is writing, "Help me from the inside out." And so you see that we're talking 1973. Forget CGI, and that's another reason why you say younger people these days don't get into this stuff, because they weren't brought up with not only just a horrifying original type scare tactics without the CGI, the psychological part. There's not a lot of psychological horror out there anymore, and that's a lot of what we grew up on. It was psychological first. Like, I applaud Japan and Korea because they still make excellent psychological horror. But it was that was one of the scenes, where it was just like, wow,
That scene's heartbreaking, because this is the point where you realize that beautiful young lady is still in there. It's not just Pazuzu. That this young, beautiful woman, little girl, not woman, this beautiful little girl is in there, and she's scared and she needs help. And like I said, as a kid, it was like, fuck that girl, light the house on fire and get out of there. It's a demon.
Right.
As a dad, it's like, it's scarier to me watching this film, because you take me, you don't, what are you doing with the little girl?
Scene, right.
I'm right here, you coward. Come get me if you want someone so bad. And something you brought up, see, psychological slashers have always been my favorite. Like, I prefer I think that, like, again, Exorcist, scariest movie ever made. I think The Exorcist 3 is a better film than The Exorcist.
I was hoping you were going to go there. We're talking The Exorcist, but can I turn the table a little bit? Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
In almost every horror movie, when you have a horror movie that not only you've seen, but you enjoy, someone can say to you, what scene? And they'll tell you. So I'm going to ask you, Exorcist 3, give me the scene. Give me the scene everybody knows from Exorcist 3 right off the bat.
The shears. The shears with the nurse
coming out of the room, right? Oh, wait, no, we might be talking about two different things. No. Okay, that was scary. Anytime I ask somebody, and this is for me too, what scene? They're like, that scene in the middle of the night in the hospital where the nurse went in to check the room, comes out, then all of a sudden the sheet comes rushing out after her.
Yeah, with the scissors, with the big shears.
Okay,
and it cuts her head off.
I thought you meant later when that scene. See, you too. Everybody with Exorcist 3, it's that scene.
But you know what? You know what scene actually gets me more than that scene? When he's at the hospital and he's looking around and the old lady's up on the roof and she's crawling and then she looks back down at him. Like, that scene got me so bad.
Classic effects.
Oh, it is. And what people don't get is they filmed that with her on the ground. Then they filmed him walking, and then they superimposed it in post, because, like I said, this is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, The Exorcist 3. It's a supernatural slasher, which by the time this has come out, I can talk about it. I just watched Malignant. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I loved Malignant, the new James Wan film. Everybody looked, and this is a movie I have not seen the horror community as divided by a horror movie as they are with Malignant. Either people really love it or they really hate it. And I was on the really loved it side, because to me, it reminded me of an 80s psychological supernatural slasher. And when you have a supernatural slasher that's done right, it could be the best film ever. So, but yeah, that old lady on the ceiling, that's another scene that really got me in The Exorcist 3, man. That one hit me hard, Joel.
Yeah, I think that was excellent. And I'm glad you brought that up. But so The Exorcist, my original. Here's the thing: I've been watching horror forever. I know different regions of the United States had something and somebody, but in the Philadelphia region, which is where I grew up, we had Dr. Shock's Theater.
Okay.
Dr. Shock was, I forget what he was like. He was just a blue collar worker, but he had this face about him when he put makeup on. His name was Joseph Solizak. And so basically he would come on the air and they'd play old black and white horror movies, B horror movies from the 50s, from the 60s. And then of course, on the way in and out of commercial, he would do some annex in his laboratory. And,
Sure.
So every Cleveland had one, almost every region had one. It was almost like, Elvira, like that. But back in the day on Saturday afternoons, it was Dr. Shock. And there are so many movies watching him as a small child, 3, 4, 5, on Saturday afternoons that were so frightening. Of course, black and white always adds an element, right?
Oh yeah.
I couldn't tell you what any of those movies are, and there's one that I've been struggling with for years to try to figure out what it is, and I can't. But so that was my earliest inclination. But to put a title on something, Exorcist was the first one that I'll always remember. Was the first one, but there was always Dr. Shock. My dad was always into the old Universal, so I met the Universal horror, the monsters early on. 8, 9, 10. I have that entire DVD collection. There's not a Universal horror monster from the 40s. I have all the Hammers. So then Hammer redid them, sort of, maybe, not really. So, but yeah, I did want to mention Dr. Shock because, like I said, I know there have been others in other areas of the world, in other areas of the country. It just seemed like it was a regional thing to have some goofy looking person, looked like a mad scientist, or actually Dr. Shock looked like a monster. And he was so funny. He was so funny, but the movies were scary.
Right. Well, see, and I'm a huge Universal Monsters fan, and I've talked about this a lot. Without the Universal Monsters, you don't get, the big 80s horror monsters with the Freddy Kruegers, the Leatherfaces, the Michael Myers, the Jason Voorhees, Chucky. Like, if you didn't have those original Universal Monsters paving the way, those monsters that affected me so much wouldn't exist today. And growing up, I loved Frankenstein. I loved Bride of Frankenstein. I've just always been a big fan of the Universal Monsters. It's just something about them that's just so beautiful and so awesome. And horror comedy is really my favorite genre of horror. And I believe Abbott and Costello versus Frankenstein really started that horror comedy. You got them shutting the door and Frankenstein opening it because it's a pull door, not a push. And there's so many great things in that movie, and it all started with Universal to me. So that I have a huge place in my heart for Universal Monsters. So I completely get what you're saying. And for us, I think by the time we didn't have it, I didn't watch a lot of the network TV because I was spoiled in a video store. But I remember every Saturday night watching Tales from the Crypt. That was my thing. Every Saturday night on HBO, you had Tales from the Crypt, and me and my cousins would gather around the TV and watch Tales from the Crypt every Saturday. So I completely get that too.
I had a friend of mine, we used to hang out on a CB all the time, and he would go on the CB and actually do the creeper's voice. And he would park his truck with the CB in it at one of the highest points in the county, and he'd get on Channel 7 was very popular. And right around midnight, he'd start talking to people like the creeper in the creeper's voice.
That's amazing, man. See, just imagine being a kid and stumbling upon that. Oh my God, this is real. There's nothing fake about it. He's out there.
Yeah. What about ghosts? All right. So you're talking about slashers, psychological slashers. What about ghosts? Especially when you talk about the 80s, okay, House. Now there's ghost elements to that, obviously, spiritual and ghost elements, but the Changeling, 1980.
I love the Changeling. But I mean, a ghost story, if it's done right, look at Poltergeist. I think Poltergeist is a phenomenal film. And there are so many ghost stories that if they're done well, even newer ghosts like The Sixth Sense. I think The Sixth Sense is a terrifying movie. I mean, everybody remembers it for that twist ending, but if you watch that movie, there are so many scary elements to that movie that are done so well. So a ghost story could be done perfectly and be a truly terrifying experience if it's done correctly.
I'm always walking around the house asking the lovely Sharon, "Hey, you're not putting pine saw on my food, are you?"
Sixth Sense.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man. Well, Joel, I want to bounce back to The Exorcist here for a second. We talked about which scene affected you the most, but I want to know which scene is your favorite scene from the original Exorcist?
This is going to sound weird, but especially in the extended version, like when they were trying to figure out what was going on with her, like, the scenes going through all the different tests and looking at the x-rays. And so like that whole culmination of scenes, because there was a lot of psychological impact there. So you're seeing some of the things that happen. You've already had the rattling in the attic. You had the candle thing in the attic. You had the freezing cold bedroom. You had all these things. But then when they get to the part where they're trying to figure out what's going on, and she's going through all the tests, and again, like I said, it's extended beautifully in the Redux. That whole portion of the movie has a psychological impact where, like you said, you're upset for this little girl. Now she's going through this. They have no idea what's going on, but it is going on. And so that's part of that where, like you said, if you do psychological right, it can impact you just as much as a scare jump. And scare jumps are great, but when you can start chewing at somebody's mind, and like you said, younger people don't understand that part of it. I'm telling you, I do. So that's why I said this might sound weird, but I think the whole point of them trying to figure out what's going on and watching her go through these tests, they did a really good job in 1973 simulating the tests they were doing, putting the needle in the Carter, you know what I mean? And so you feel even worse for her. And then you get that impact again because you don't know, like they don't know what's going on. They can't give the woman an answer, and so there's a lot of psychological in that one part of the movie that a lot of people don't get. And maybe I'm just different that way. I don't know.
Right. Well, and I think that you can agree with me. We're not trying to slam people that are younger than us. We're not saying you're less intelligent or anything like that. But when you've grown up watching better effects and obviously scarier movies when it comes to a sit down watch than The Exorcist, it's hard for you to go back in time to the late 70s and be like, yeah, this is just as scary as Saw or The Ring or something that I just watched recently. It's hard for that to happen. So we're not trying to slam anybody for being young or ignorant, nothing like that. Please don't misconstrue what we're saying, because that's not what we're saying.
Right.
It's just when you watched it for the first time at 4, it really, between 4 and 9, compared to watching it for the first time between 12 and 16 when you've already watched a bunch of horror movies, it really is a different experience. So we're not trying to slam anybody. That's not what we're doing. It's a whole different experience from watching it for the first time as a young person to having it be your 80th horror movie in your teens. It's just a whole different experience. So that's where we're going with that. So Joel, we talked about your first horror movie being The Exorcist and how it affected you, but now real quick, my friend, I want to go scream on you. What's your favorite scary movie? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
I hate this question. It's The Changeling by far with George C. Scott. And in fact, my oldest daughter, she's weird about movies. She likes horror movies and she watches them with me. She actually traveled from New Jersey to come to see us in Delaware one night to watch Grave Encounters with me. I got it. I'm like, come over. So, but she does not like old movies. And I always joke with her. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. It's older than 3 years. I guess you're not going to watch it." So I had her come over to the house one night, and I said, "I want you to watch a movie." "What is it?" "Don't worry about it. Just come over to me." And it was The Changeling, because it was 1980. I couldn't tell her it was like 7 years before she was born or 5 years before she was born. She'd never watch it, and I got her to watch it that way, and she really enjoyed it. But another one that my dad introduced to me and at a young age, and he introduced that to me. Peter Straub as a writer, and Ghost Story, another movie and another fine book. But The Changeling, come on, the ball coming down the step scene, forget about it. Again, no special effects. The banging throughout the house. And then how about that twist when you find out what the banging the whole time really was? The boy banging against the metal tub. Come on, this is psychological horror. Ghosts are the best.
Yeah. And The Changeling is another movie that I believe they are in talks to remake, or they've just signed on to do a remake of. Which again, I'm not inherently against remakes. If you can do it and you can do it well, great job. But there are some movies that if you're going to do it, I feel that way, like I did about The Thing prequel in 2011. You got to use practical effects, and the CGI in The Thing 2011 really ruined it. A lot of my top 3 favorite practical effect horror movies, in no order: A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Thing, and American Werewolf in London. And all 3 of the reboot / sequels to those movies were ruined by CGI instead of practical effects. American Werewolf in Paris, the CGI was just not very good. Same thing with The Thing 2011 and the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. The CGI was awful. And to go from these considered low budget horror movies, if you look at the budget they used and the practical effects that they did in those movies, whether it's the blood bed in Nightmare on Elm Street, or you look at The Thing and the blood transformation, you look at American Werewolf and the actual werewolf transformation with his hands extending out and the snout coming out.
It was one of the best transformations on screen. Yeah.
Oh, the best werewolf transformation ever, hands down. So it's one of those things where if you're going to remake a movie like that, just like with The Changeling, if you're going to do a remake of it, use practical effects. Don't try to CGI it up. Use your practical effects. Hire somebody that knows what they're doing with the practical effects and go that route with it, and you can make an amazing horror movie still to this day.
Right. Well, look at the effects they used in the original Nosferatu in 1922. I mean, they used black and white and shadows.
Yep.
Again, not to pick on younger people, but they wouldn't get that today. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it's Abbott and Costello versus Frankenstein, they lit the guy on fire. And he walked down the dock until he got too hot and he fell over into the water.
Yeah.
The practical effects, to me, if I would rather see mediocre practical effects than mediocre CGI. If you're going to use effects, use practical effects, hire somebody, keep the industry going with the money that you're making with practical effects and make it look good. That's all you got to do. Make it look good. Use practical effects. Use CGI to enhance it, but don't lean on CGI, especially in horror films. It doesn't work. It's not as scary to me to see CGI. Now, again, I want everybody to know I am not anti-CGI. There are plenty of times where you can use CGI, it's amazing because you don't even realize that it's CGI. But I'm just a bigger fan of practical effects. Growing up in the 80s, I think and most horror fans I know are much bigger practical effect horror fans. So, Joel, before I let you go, I always ask one question to end this. We're going to go back to The Exorcist. I think I know the answer, my friend, but I got to ask anyway. We're going to rank this on a skull count. 0 skulls being the worst and 5 being the best. Now, what we're doing here is we're not ranking The Exorcist on production. We're not being film critics. The score, the acting, that means nothing right now. What we're doing is we're ranking this strictly on what this movie means to you and how much it affected you on first viewing. So 0 being the worst and 5 being the best. You can use half and quarter skulls. What would your ranking of The Exorcist be?
I would have to give it a solid 5. It scared the shit out of me, and I had nightmares. If that's not a 5, and I mean, when I jump watching horror movies, and my wife jumps because she's doing something else, and she goes, "What's the matter?" I said, "Oh, the movie." Well, why do you watch it then? If it doesn't make me jump, it's worthless as a horror movie. Yeah. If I'm not scared, it's worthless.
I want you to make me think, and I want you to scare me. I want to think about. And again, I don't want to get too off on a tangent here, but that was what I found wrong with 2021's Candyman. There was not a lot of horror elements in that movie to me. The original Candyman, the parking garage scene alone, the Helen, like that makes my skin crawl. That haunted my dreams. The 2021's Candyman did not have those fear elements, in my opinion. And I agree with you. When I watch a movie like Candyman, to this day, the original Candyman scares the shit out of me. That's a scary movie. That's what I want. And horror movie is like drugs. Don't condone drug use, but you do that first time and you get that high, and then you're constantly chasing that dragon again. You always want that next jump, that next scare. And I love it. Horror movies is the best type of drugs out there, man.
I will not watch the 2021 Candyman, but that's not for the same reason. I watched the original once, and I didn't look at a mirror for about a month. And so the reason I'm not watching 2021's is frankly because I can't watch the original again. And I never saw any of the sequels. It frightened me that much.
Yeah.
And,
so I believe
as an amateur ghost hunter, things like that and things that, we've seen. So, we were talking about mirrors and saying this and the Bloody Mary thing and all that other stuff has an already implanted psychological effect on me. And I will not watch the original Candyman ever again. And so I'm not going to watch the new one for the same reason.
You're not missing out. So I do want to remind everybody, make sure you click the links down here in the description for Joel. Make sure you're checking out him and the lovely Sharon. We appreciate you guys checking us out. As always, guys. Joel, don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you, my friend.
Okay.
Everyone else,
Thank you.
keep talking horror. Stay what you are. And we'll see you guys soon.